Welcome to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production all the way to release and reception. It is an older movie that is on HBO Max. Chris, was this officially my choice?
Yes, though we have been talking about doing this film for an episode for a good while now, and I'm so glad it's finally happening.
For a long time, yeah. It's one of those...
We have a dog as our guest today.
Well, that's a good intro. We do have returning guests, Brigitte and Mark. How are you guys doing? This is your third episode?
Yeah, I think so.
Something like that.
We did that home invasion movie.
Oh, Desperate Hours.
And then the Toy Soldiers.
Yeah.
Swingers. This is your fourth episode.
And Swingers, yeah. I love that you always have me on to talk about these really feminist any women at all. Looking for any woman.
Just any
female characters.
Just any female character really is enough at this point. But yeah, we're happy to be back. Happy to be here with our dog Crunch, who's just as psyched as we are.
So how do we even intro Cable Guy? I mean, I think I saw it when I was 13 when it came out. It was one of those movies that I don't think I didn't really understand what I was watching. And I think I saw it a few times in the theaters, maybe twice. And it's one of those films that for some reason has stuck with me as this sort of bizarre sort of abnormality of, like, I don't know, buddy comedies. I don't even know what you would call it, dark comedies.
Yeah, I
don't know. I mean, how'd you guys come to the, I mean, did you all see this when it came out?
Goodness, no.
Okay, no.
I mean, my as a I won't speak for hashtag all women, but as a woman coming of age in the 90s, having mildly different experiences as my male counterparts coming of age in the 90s, this is one of those movies that I place into this little like bucket or file, if you will, in my brain of like movies that boys you might want to date in college are probably super into. And among them are movies that you've never really seen before or you've seen and you didn't really get them. Mallrats is one of those movies. This is one of those movies. And y'all might hate me, but Goonies is one of those movies. Like
that's an interesting parallel.
And like and Goonies is one too that like I saw as a kid and was into, but and I'm not going to be super articulate because I haven't planned it. It's just coming out right now. But there's something about like this category of movies that's like, if you're kind of a nerdy, cool guy and you're like into film, but also you have like a playful side, there's like a certain list of movies, and you're like in your 20s, there's like a certain list of movies that you watch.
This is definitely one of them.
And this is definitely one of them. And I actually watched it for the first time a year ago with Mark at some point during the pandemic when it had come out in my 14-year marriage. I'd never seen The Cable Guy. And in fact, like always like a little bit confused like The Cable Guy with Larry the Cable Guy. Mark was like, "Oh, like
you've never seen the Cable
Guy?" And we watched it, and we got through like half of it, and I just like couldn't do it anymore. I felt so sad, so I watched the whole thing for this podcast for the first time.
Well, we appreciate the hard work and torture you put yourself through watching this movie.
I really want you guys to accept me.
Chris, if you were a Zoomer, you didn't know anything about what we were talking about, what would you need to know about The Cable Guy?
Crunch objects to that line of questioning, but I mean, you know, I have so many thoughts, but to answer your question as succinctly as possible, I will attempt to basically just say that, like, I have a 9-year-old son who often is curious about like what movie I'm watching for the podcast any given week. And this is the first one in a good while where I had to, I told him it's called The Cable Guy. And he's like, what is a cable guy? And like trying to explain that concept was really difficult because like we don't even have internet guys anymore, right? Like you just do it on your phone when we moved into a house last year and didn't have to like interact with anybody, to sign up for Xfinity. So like that whole like just straight up concept just doesn't work for today's generation. And in terms of like tone, I think that's a big bag of worms. That's not the right idiom.
Big old bag of worms.
A big old sloshy bag of worms. But I do think there's like that dark comedy aspect that has endured. One of the few kind of remnants that was definitely very popular in the 90s, especially like Brigitte said, with a certain kind of young man. But we still get that today, don't we? I feel like that's still very much like, that's like an almost enduring like chic kind of thing. Everything from like, you know, the Edgar Wright movies to I don't know, like Horrible Bosses, Young Adult, which we did recently. Jennifer's Body, Diablo Cody in general. So like, I don't know. I don't think that this is, I think the story is insane, especially looking at it in 2021. The tone though, I think we're onto something.
Interesting.
I actually,
that's one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was gonna say, yeah, that's one of the reasons. One of the reasons why I wanted to choose this movie, because it does have a weird shelf life to it. Because when it came out, obviously Jim Carrey was massive this year. Yeah. He gets the $20 million, like Mark said, for this movie. Is a big milestone for him. It's Ben Stiller's second film after Reality Bites. And Judd Apatow is the producer here.
Right. There's another, correlation.
Kind of on top of the world, and kind of feel like probably had a kind of a blank check, which
but also except for Jim Carrey and arguably Ben Stiller, who was just a known quantity at the time, but really had a very, very mild hit with Reality Bites. But everybody else, like Judd Apatow, this is his third flop in a row as producer, and like he did Heavyweights in '95. About the kids going to fat camp. That was a flop. He did Celtic Pride earlier that year with what's his name? Marv, Daniel Stern. And that flops even worse. And so like, I mean, this guy really stuck around, and like I said, I think there's an element to it. And then there's this whole like postmodern aspect, like Charlie Kaufman vibes going on too.
Whoa, that's maybe giving it a lot of credit. I don't know, maybe not. I mean,
that's what I'm going to be doing throughout this course of the podcast, giving the movie a lot of credit.
A lot of credit. Yeah, I mean, it's you can't. One of the big things about this film is when it got released. You're right, but the key is that Jim Carrey was the headliner, right?
Yeah.
And so it was expected to be a certain Ace Ventura like
certain type of silly
film. Yeah, and it was PG-13, wasn't it? Yeah,
it was. Yeah.
So I think there was an expectation there that it was going to be a little bit more on this sort of slapsticky, kind of fun and dumb. It is all of those things, but there's this extremely dark undercurrent to the whole thing, and also a media satire thing going on at the same time, which I don't know if works. I don't know if it sort of says anything to us today when we're looking back at it, but. It was not as expected, I don't think, when people went to go see this in June of 1996. Also a summer release. Right in the heart of summer.
It was definitely like, summer of 96 for me, too. It was like a coming of age for me. Like, movies that are coming out in the summer, I'm going to see what all of them are. I'm going to know the whole calendar all summer long. And so, like, this was a highlights. Was this the same year that Clueless and that was probably 95, right?
A little bit, yeah.
It was the summer of Independence Day.
That's right. Yeah.
Comes out like 3 weeks after this.
And when did Scream come out? Was that 97?
96.
96?
Yeah. But December 96.
Okay.
Yeah, but so I mean, it was very like it was an event for sure. And I think like what's fascinating to me is just how Jim Carrey, like, I feel like this really set Jim Carrey's career in kind of a weird direction, because he was coming off of Ace Ventura, he's coming off of The Mask, he's coming off of Batman Forever.
Oh my gosh!
And
yeah,
and so it was like he was really riding high, and and then like after that, I feel like if I recalling correctly, like after that he went back to like Liar Liar to be more like let's get back to being like a straight like what the audiences want kind of thing. But it's like I don't know.
But then he
go ahead.
He also did Truman Show in '98, going back on like the media satire, kind of more smartsy, artsy, fartsy line of things. So like he tried to constantly have his cake and eat it too in the late '90s, and then it got even weirder in the 2000s.
Yes,
but it's just
this
a
is
strange
kind of like a note that he wants to do something different, right?
Exactly. He does not want to be known as Ace Ventura, even though he's probably still at this point, like at the MTV Movie Awards, you know, talking out of his butt, like he's trying to milk it.
You think so?
You know, and there's definitely Ace Ventura-esque qualities to his performance in this movie.
Course. Yeah.
Right? Like there's a lot of physicality to his performance, but it's just such in a uncomfortable direction. But like I don't know, I feel like I've not rewatched Ace Ventura, but I feel like that movie's probably got to age a lot worse than this one.
Yeah,
and that's saying something.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's probably there's something to that. I think.
Yeah,
I mean,
I forgot about the whole crux of the.
The first one.
Yeah,
right.
I forgot a lot of that. Ace Ventura.
Do we do a synopsis on this one? Should we talk about what this movie is about?
What is it about exactly?
What is the cable guy?
I kind of already am like, I hate that you compared it to Fatal Attraction because it's totally true, but Fatal Attraction is like one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time.
And I think Cable Guy's in my top 5 now. So let's.
Oh God!
Let's draw the lines.
You're gonna kill me, so. All right, I'll do the synopsis.
Okay, thank you.
We got this. Matthew Broderick plays Steven, who just got dumped by his girlfriend because he asked her to marry him.
I mean, yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. Played by Leslie Mann, who is the wife of Judd Apatow in real life. He goes to his new apartment. He wants to get his cable, which in the old days, like Chris sort of mentioned, you did have to get a cable guy to show up and actually hook up your cable TV. This is before the internet would have been through your cable guy. Okay. This is when your internet would have been through your phone line. So he wouldn't do internet, just TV. And it turns out the cable guy is kind of a wacky, played by, of course, Jim Carrey, wacky, kind of definitely creepy, overly familiar dude who ends up trying to befriend Steven, and hijinks ensue.
Dark, depressing hijinks.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, Chip Douglas is the cable guy. He starts stalking Steven and gets involved in his life, and he kind of ruins his life in a very controlling and dark way. But yeah, it's definitely got the Fatal Attraction vibe, Basic Instinct, like Cannot Rocks the Cradle. They even mentioned that when they were writing this movie, essentially, that like they were trying to parody those films with this script. The original script was not really dark at all. The original script was meant for Chris Farley. Was a lot lighter.
How do you like that?
But Ben Stiller read it and was basically like, I don't want to do this movie. And I think they did like more than a few rewrites to make it as dark as possible. I think Judd Apatow made it so dark that Sony was like, "No, we can't," or Columbia was like, "We can't really do this stuff." But that's kind of the gist of it. You know, it's essentially a stalker film. Is that sort of, I don't know, like what did any of you guys expect that going into this movie?
That it would be a stalker film?
Yeah, like a kind of a really dark stalker film.
No.
I definitely remember like my seeing it in the theater, and I think before we were on the air, I was remembering, I think I saw it more than once in theaters because me and my buddies liked it that much. But yeah, I definitely remember being like laughing hard at parts where it wasn't like parts where it was like I was really hoping for some big laughs, like big Ace Ventura laughs, I think deep down. And I remember like laughing at the basketball scene And
Yeah.
But also like underneath kind of thinking like this is like a little bit more intense than usual, but like I'm still laughing because this is fun and I'm having a good time. And then I definitely remember like my experience as a 13-year-old. The back half of the movie was dark as hell. Like I just remember feeling like very like 13-year-old, a little bit frightened.
But the second half of the movie does get really, there's like a total twist shift, but it's like it's dark from the beginning too.
Yes,
like there's not necessarily a shift. What
makes it dark? Because we also keep on saying dark, but what, as compared to a normal slapsticky comedy like Ace Ventura, what makes this one hit so differently?
I was trying to figure that out too upon my rewatch, because like I don't know, maybe I'm just wired differently, because I was like, Jess was a little concerned, my wife, because I was cackling in the basement pretty regularly, and yet like I was trying to take note of like when I would laugh, like how much it was like this very strange, like visceral combination of the kind of like nervous laughter that became more popular in the 2000s with the advent of The Office and cringe comedy in general, right?
Yes.
But there was also this element like where I wasn't just like nervous laughing because it was like gut busting. Like I was literally like having a lot of fun with both identifying with Steven, Matthew Broderick's kind of straight guy protagonist, because I feel like I've definitely been in that situation where there's been people that, have tried to like try to make up a friendship where there is no friendship to be had, whether it's because, of just a different kind of upbringing or like a working relationship. I definitely identified with it a lot more thinking about like the different people I've had to work with as an adult compared to like when I was 13. But also there's very much like this little kid mentality, like it reminded me a little bit of like Heathers and Mean Girls, of those moments where it's just like you have a complete averse reaction, but you cannot help but just like laugh maniacally because it's so stupid. It's so like juvenile, which I think is still where I get like some of that Ace Ventura feeling from, because it's like it's not just like dark comedy that like is like makes you think and makes you chuckle, but more like it's really trying to push the envelope and make you wonder how good of a person you actually are. Like it really was some startling self-reflection thinking about like the friendships or the friendships that could have been growing up, and then just like how I generally am bad at socializing, especially in a work setting. So it resonated with me greatly, but
I found it super depressing. I would describe myself as relatively outgoing, affable, easy to make friendships, super popular. Everyone loves me. No, there's something about like the Jim Carrey's character from the very beginning that just makes me feel like deeply, deeply sad. Like, in a way that like I don't also feel like it's cringy funny, and I like cringe comedy. Like I don't want to sound like a killjoy, because like Curb Your Enthusiasm is like, is that cringe kind of? Like that's like one of my favorite shows. Like I love that show, and I've been trying to think about or meditate on like the difference, and I think it's that like Larry David is doing stuff, but like he's like an intact mentally, like he's gonna be okay. There's like a punching up sort of thing, even though it's Larry David kind of being cringy and getting into situations usually. And I know like then there's that shift in this movie where suddenly like he's the stalker and like he's doing this creepy stuff, and it almost seems like, were you like faking some of the like social incompetency from earlier in the movie? Is this like the weird game you play? But like the beginning of the movie made me feel like depressed and sad, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like this guy like doesn't appreciate boundaries, and it makes me now as a Zoomer think about like, well, maybe he's like, it's like a very neurotypical lens of like social interactions and how people like talk to each other, and especially thinking about like the service industry aspect of it. And I like there's just like so much stuff in there that just makes me feel like really uncomfortable. And talking about like the storyline, like the tone age is okay, and there is like something, I hate to say like universal, but like archetypal in like this like storyline, right? It's kind of this like weirdo outsider, and then you kind of develop a friendship tentatively, and you're trying to be nice if you're the Matthew Broderick character, and then it kind of pushes too far, and then you can't get out of it, and it becomes like a stalker situation. But in terms of like the actual plot points and the things that like make the movie, the storyline work, I feel like you couldn't make that movie now. Do you know?
So,
like well, again, because I feel like it's I don't know. Like I also feel like this is gonna make me sound silly too, but like a lot of like the way that Jim Carrey plays this character feels really like yucky. Like just like I'm a weirdo, and the first way you can tell is that like I have a lisp.
Yeah,
like that kind of thing. And like that's just, like I was thinking like what if this was like a movie that was like made today with like a different cast of actors, and like the cable guy like was just like the same lines and everything, but like played like completely straight.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That,
like without like the affect of like film. I have like, yeah, I mean, and it could have like been interestingly effective, and I don't know, but I don't know if it's like the person in me that works with like awkward college students, or that like was an awkward kid at some point too, but like there's that piece of like not knowing like how to interact with people, and like wanting to make connections, and you're not able to make connections, and like that's the piece that just like felt like deeply sad to me.
Well, see, go ahead, it's interesting. The lisp thing, I felt like hit different in particular because like I got less mad at the depiction of Chip's lisp than I was like finding myself getting mad at Matthew Broderick for like constantly bringing up like how his doctor's a speech therapist, and like giving him the how to lose your lisp tape. Like that was the part that really like resonated with me, I think more so than previous watches when I was younger, is like, yes, I think there's the neurotypical aspect is I think spot on, because like ultimately having, you know, a lot more experience being grown, I'm like really finding myself laughing at the scenes because Matthew Broderick's character is bad. Like he's not good either.
No, he's a bad guy.
Yeah. So
let's dive deeper into that. So let's talk about how is Matthew Broderick? Well,
we can start with the fact that he broke up with his girlfriend, quote, because he proposed, or she broke up with him because he proposed. I mean, like, and like the lack of any kind of like actual examination of like that relationship, or what she wants, or why he even likes her.
He becomes so tunnel focused on how to get her back,
right,
rather than like actually examining his role in their relationship. And like to the point where he's like manipulating her, just like Chip's manipulating him.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Because Chip is the one driving that, right? That's not really him. It's Chip trying to get a wedge in. Chip is essentially finding an emotional weak spot and going after it.
Well,
right.
And trying to control him.
Yeah, but he's also
Matthew Broderick's. Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I mean, okay. So, I'll let it. Yeah.
So I don't know the answer to this, but I know as a 13-year-old, my 13-year-old lens, I definitely came away from the movie not feeling like he was a bad guy, though. So I want to know.
You're supposed to think.
I want to know, like, is that Are we supposed to feel that way?
I don't think he's like. I don't think Matthew Broderick is like looking at the script and he's like, "Ooh, this guy's actually kind of an asshole. I'm going to play it that way." And I don't think he's written for the audience. I think we're supposed to identify with Matthew Broderick. The hint is that it's Matthew Broderick.
Right.
Has he ever been in a movie where we're not supposed to like identify with him?
He's a beloved. Yeah, he's a beloved.
Election.
I actually could make an argument that even the way that Election presents him is that we're kind of supposed to identify with him.
Yeah,
but we're also like it's like in a Trojan horse way, right? Where like they try to bring you in and make you think he's empathetic, but actually,
especially with the turn of the second. But also like you can't. I mean, there's also the thing of like the intention, and then like the dominant culture that drives most of the audience members, which is 13-year-old white straight boys. Like, so what are they gonna think? Like, you know. But I think Matthew Broderick is
they intended him to be.
I think
the hero here.
I think he's supposed to be the hero, and I think that that's partly like shown in like all the subtle contrasts of how like his friends are mean to Chip and he's nice and he's like still working to kind of try to include him, and even the fact that he like struggles with like, how do I break off this friendship? I don't want to hurt his feelings, right? Like, yeah. I think he's presented as like an empathetic character.
We think he's kind of, that is a shallow reading of him. Like there's some other,
I think so. To it. I think it's a shallow reading of him in the way that like a lot of people would probably consider themselves empathetic characters, and they're limited more than they like to think they are. Like, I'm like thinking about like social interaction situations. Like, usually if I'm looking back, like I would cast myself as like the good guy trying to navigate it. But that I don't have any perspective, right? Like, sure. I don't know.
I posit that the film is a nihilist examination of masculinity insofar as men are doomed to either become a Steven or a Chip. Essentially, two variations of the incel.
I think that is an excellent framework for this film, and it could be taught that way in a film studies class, and I would die on the hill that there's no way that was the intention behind this.
Yeah, it's funny you say that though. One of the Letterboxd reviews is Ben Stiller should have directed Joker.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of spot on. Like because there is that element of like, yeah, you're right. It's two very odd depictions of masculinity, neither of which seem very healthy or well adjusted.
I really enjoyed exploring masculinity with you all every time we're on this podcast, by the way. That's really become the theme.
Maybe next time, Bridget, as a treat, next time you can pick a female-centered film.
Like Sex and the City? Or The Holiday? I'm kidding.
Sex and the City 2?
JK! They aren't female-centric films.
So no intention of that, though. We think that that's all kind of, what would we call that? A deconstruction of what they're doing here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Applying a framework that wouldn't have existed yet in popular culture. Not didn't exist, period, but wouldn't have existed for the people involved in making this film.
True. I'm curious what y'all think about this quote from Ben Stiller in the LA Times talking about this concept of dark humor. Since I brought up the I word, incel, another kind of term that gets bandied about, especially in the age of the internet, which, by the way, is very fascinatingly, upon its 25th anniversary, talked about by Chip in his monologue on the satellite, right?
Yeah.
One day you'll be able to be on your phone, computer, and television at once, playing with Mortal Kombat with somebody in Vietnam. But another buzzword that comes up is edgy. And Ben Stiller said in this quote about, quote, edgy humor in the LA Times, quote, I don't think there's anything that we shouldn't be allowed to laugh at except maybe killing children, rape, or horrible things like that, which in no way could possibly be funny. But other than that, I don't think there should be any rules. Stalking, obsessive, compulsive people are all part of life. For me, I'm not that interested in just escapist humor that doesn't have a connection with reality. So is there... does that kind of muddy the waters for our discussion regarding intentionality, or is Ben Stiller just kind of playing the, typical famous guy card of like anti-cancel culture?
I'm going to go with option B, Chris. Especially since, and to a certain extent, again, like I'm, people know me as funny girl Brigitte. I like laughing, but I do think that like culture changes and evolves, and we like learn to do better with like what we again like I feel like a lot of things when I think about like, why was that funny for me, why was that not funny, like why did I find that, like, which I would also call like edgy or dark or whatever, funny, and this other thing I thought like was offensive. And again, I feel like it kind of comes back to this like punching up versus punching down thing. And that can be really tricky to like navigate and also to like understand. But like there's something in this movie that feels like it's punching down. And even the quote from Ben Stiller, like, okay, well, the obvious things that are not funny, which is killing children or rape, and it's like, yeah, I agree that those are never funny, but then obsessive compulsive is, I mean, and again, like, I don't want to say that I can't distinguish between those two things in terms of like scope or severity, but like, who makes those decisions about what's funny and what's not? Like, it seems like he's saying like, of course there are lines, but I'm telling you what the lines are, and if you're offended, that means you. Even framing it as like, there's nothing that we're not allowed to laugh at. Like, no one's saying you're not allowed to laugh at it. Like, you can have whatever visceral reaction you want to things.
Right.
But we can also like reflect on like what we as a culture decide is acceptable. I don't know.
Well, I think that quote is particularly confusing considering the fact that there are literally like 5 rape jokes in a row. In the prison scene.
There's tons.
Oh, well, that's weird.
I'm not.
He probably didn't even consider those to be rape jokes. Well, I mean, like, that's the grossness of this. Like, and you talk about like the, how did you put it so eloquently, Chris, about like the tragedy of masculinity as it's framed in dominant culture, right? Of like, like I was watching this thinking like, man, is this how like boys were taught that like men make friendships?
Right.
Like this, I mean, and obviously the cable guy friendship is an example of like, this is like what a weird person who doesn't understand social boundaries would do. But like, I didn't get the sense that he had, our main character, what's his face? Matthew Broderick had like good male friendships. Like, I didn't see that modeled.
Right.
You know?
Well, like the Jack Black character is also interesting because it's like, he's like, me, you won't ever go to concerts with me. And then he's also being like, me, you bring your weird friends to basketball.
Right. Like, yeah.
I mean, I think the punching down thing is what really gets me, because I think that there's a sense of cruelty in this movie.
Yeah.
And I think it's coming from Apatow and Stiller kind of against Chip's character. And I'm going to like take that incel concept a little bit further here. This kind of feels like they're painting Chip as this sort of pathetic, alienated outsider. And like they're kind of kicking him when he's down, you know, like it's not. And I think they think that they're clever and funny, but Chip's character is like really sad, and like pathetic, and in a way that, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of like a teenage boy making fun of somebody.
Yes.
And it has that sort of like, they don't realize like there's no empathy there whatsoever.
Yeah.
I think
devoid of empathy.
I think too, like from Jim Carrey's perspective and thinking about his whole career arc after this, I think, you know, if I were to psychoanalyze him and his movie decisions, I think there's a lot of that like sadness that comes out in his movies post Cable Guy, you know, in Truman Show, obviously, but you know, Eternal Sunshine, like where, and even like kind of now, you know, like I think he was on a show on Showtime that was like very sad, and going backwards, Man on the Moon. I mean, I think there's like that element of it where he probably was thrilled to not have to be like The Mask and Ace Ventura, and I think that played into what you guys are saying about versus his performance versus Stiller and Apatow. Like, I think it is kind of a weird mix. Like now looking back, where it's almost like I feel like Jim Carrey is playing excited about it in a way that was different than I think what Stiller and Apatow were probably going for.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I think that probably from Jim Carrey, because he's the $20 million star, the it guy of the moment in the mid-90s, sees himself as the protagonist. And I honestly like think that there's an argument, as much as I'm joking, there is like a really strong part of me that while watching this film really felt like I was empathizing with Chip more than I was Steven.
Yeah.
Maybe they were both they both were making terrible choices and doing, you know, downright despicable things. But ultimately, like, the only thing that Chip is trying to do is have a friend. He just doesn't know how.
Yeah.
And that's sad, but it's also, like, I think hugely relatable in terms of, like, why, you know, going back to what I was saying about, like, the visceral laughter is, like, I'm not just laughing because it's awkward and I've been in that awkward position in Steven's role, but also because perhaps if I'm really holding the mirror to my face, like, trying to, like, see all the horrible times that I've tried to, like, make friends and failed.
So so I have to, like, now continue this rhetorical analysis on the tone of the film, right? So, like, I also, like, when I was talking about how, like, this film, when I watched just the first half of it with Mark, I was like, this is so sad, I don't want to continue to watch it. The sadness comes from, I absolutely empathize with Chip. Like, I mean, like, he's awkward. I've been awkward. I spent much of my life being, like, a nerdy girl who wasn't part of, like, girl culture and was, like, rejected by, like, male dominated nerd culture and like trying so hard to figure out, like, I don't know where to be. But, like, so, like, I've been in that. I mean, all jokes aside, like, as a younger person, especially, like, moving around in middle school, like, I've been there where I'm just, like, trying really hard to make a friend and watched a lot of TV, like, going off, like, what I saw. But this is where, like, when I think about, like, the intention behind, like, which characters we're supposed to root for, who we're supposed to think are, like, the good guys and the bad guys, like the normies, is that the first half or whatever of the movie, you kind of empathize with this Chip character and you kind of feel like, okay, Matthew Broderick is doing a good thing by befriending him, and maybe this will turn into a friendship and we can learn a lesson. And then with this shift in tone and plot and whatever, suddenly I feel like I read that as you were a sucker if you empathized with Chip. Chip is a weirdo psychopath. Now that you've let him into your life, he's going to destroy you. And he was never a good guy. And, like, the lesson is, like, in some ways, like, similar to that, like, quote unquote lesson in Fatal Attraction, where it's like, you don't let these people into your life. You don't stray from the path of, like, what you're meant to do, because this is what happens. Your bunny gets boiled on the stove top. You know, and I mean, and there's also just the fun of, like, watching a thriller, and I don't want to read too much into that, but this is where I feel like that shift is really important to me and why I'm uncomfortable with the movie overall, and why I think ultimately, like, the intention there is not to empathize with Chip.
Yeah, I mean, Chip, ultimately, he comes across as severely mentally ill. Like, he has some sort of abandonment. I mean, I can't diagnose anybody, but someone with
parcel of, like, the complete void of mental health discourse in the 90s.
Right? 100%.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right. Like, yeah, like this, what he's doing is so obviously, like, self-destructive and abusive to everybody around him. I mean, one of the quotes that I thought was weird about this is, you know, they say they're going to parody Hand That Rocks the Cradle. But they basically, like, what does he say? And this is what Stiller said in the LA Times, that same article. In The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Rebecca De Mornay's character breastfeeds this woman's baby that isn't her own. In Cape Fear, he kills her dog. So we are trying to come up with funny variations of that. In our version, the cable guy ruins a pickup basketball game, plays porno password, gets his friend in jail. There are only really 6 punches in the entire movie. To me, that is so blind to what takes place in this film. Like, putting somebody in prison is not a small act. Right. That is, like, he basically ruins his entire life. And, like, by doing that, I just don't... This whole movie reminds me of It's Just a Prank, Bro. It's not that big of a deal, whatever, man. And that, for some reason, that tone just doesn't jive at all with sort of the mental illness of Jim Carrey's character. It just, everything and you could tell that the studio was like, what are you guys doing? And all like the insider, like this LA Times article is amazing because it's like it came out right when this movie came out, and all the inside leaks are in this article.
Oh, interesting.
And they're basically like Columbia was too scared to say anything against Carrey and Stiller because they were on the same page, basically saying this guy's going to be a psychopath and violent. And Columbia was like, we don't really want this, but we don't really know what to do. Because Jim Carrey's a $20 million man. We can't touch this. So you could tell that the studio was very reluctant to put this thing out in the way that it is.
Oh, sorry.
And so I don't know. The thing that sticks out to me personally is when I was younger and I saw this, I thought it was hilarious. The multiple sort of action sequences, if you call them, the medieval times, the basketball pickup game, the password scene.
With Bob Odenkirk,
With Bob Odenkirk as Steven's brother. Those all work in isolation.
Yeah,
but when
I agree.
Weave it all together, it's this really kind of, I would say, like, it's cringe. Cringe works for me when the stakes are super, super low.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work when the stakes are very, like, high. Chris, I want your rebuttal to this.
Yeah. Because I'm curious, the distinction between watching a movie like this and feeling saddened and turned off versus watching, say, like a horror comedy, a like erotic thriller that has like a lot of like playful and entertaining aspects to it. Like we recently did an episode on Body Heat, and there's like some really like absurdist moments in an otherwise serious film, and yet it comes across as like entertaining and ostentatious, and we laud it. But when it's done in this kind of format, because there's, I don't know, so I mean, there you could definitely, mentally diagnose so many violent characters that we laugh at in 80s and 90s cinema. What's so bad about this movie in comparison to all of those other movies that we have fun with, where there's like vastly greater amounts of bloodshed and deceit and manipulation?
Did we lose him? Chris, where'd you go?
No, vastly what?
Vastly what?
Vastly what, Chris? I'm going to respond to him in action.
Okay. Please.
I would say that he'll pop back on, I think. Hopefully soon. The thing that sticks out to me with this movie is that Chris is talking like Body Heat and in those films. I would say that there's a parody element here. Now, Ben Stiller and Apatow say this is a parody. I do not believe them.
No, it's a parody the way a group of like high school boys would like write a parody for the school talent show, and it's actually just like making fun of nerds.
Yeah, it just
like, it has that feel to it. Like, yeah.
I think they intended it to be a parody, but it comes across as sort of just like this is what we think is funny, but what they think is funny is so weird and cruel.
Yeah, there's a cruelness to it.
Bizarre.
So I don't know if this would be part of what Chris was describing, but I'm thinking about like how much I enjoy Fatal Attraction.
Yeah, okay.
And I don't like this movie, and part of it is that I don't feel like any of Fatal Attraction is supposed to be funny. So like there's this like what I like enjoy about it is like it's a well-crafted film. Also just like it's well acted and well shot, and there's something, about the Michael Douglas and Glenn Close and that era of New York City. But like I feel like that's like a really well-paced, well-made thriller. And again with this film, it's like I feel like sometimes parody can become this like get out of jail free card or like blanket term when you failed. I mean, who am I? I've never made a movie, but like, like, is it a parody though? Because there's again, like the for me, like the shift in the character, is so abrupt and complete that I have a hard time knowing like what how I'm supposed to feel with the movie. And again, like there are these movies that do that kind of shift, and it's done really well. and I like it. And I feel like this just, I don't know why, but it just didn't work for me, the way they did that. And I think part of it was that I left myself like thinking, so is Jim Carrey actually super socially savvy to the point of being able to manipulate people in his world?
Yeah.
Or is it just like a goof? Or is it that he's like doing these cringy things, not knowing that he's pushing the boundaries too far? Like, I had a really hard time understanding, I don't know, that.
Well, maybe we're missing a big part of this.
Sure.
We haven't really gotten into this, media satire aspect.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
That ends up being a through line,
Mhm.
almost like a distinct parallel at the end
Yeah.
with everybody, including Kyle Gass of Tenacious D, watching the end of the trial of the fake Menendez brothers thing with Ben Stiller, and like with Truman Show, everybody's like waiting to see what Truman will do next, and we're seeing like actual audience members and viewers, and it's very much arguably with definitely not nearly as much finesse and clarity as the Truman Show, but ultimately trying to suggest that we as viewers are kind of lapping it up, just like the viewers of the fake Menendez trial, just like the viewers of the Truman Show. This drama, this tension, right? To the point of like wondering if it's exploitation, if it's just another form of manipulation that, just like Chip is doing, in like a brain rotted brainworm's attempt at finding a friend because he's been raised on television, whatever bullshit, from his childhood. So like, is there any aspect of that you guys felt worked, or is it just kind of like so hodgepodgey and it's so generally just concerned with the relationship between Chip and Steven that doesn't come through at all? Because there's something there, I just don't think it fully connects.
I think that I mean, I always read that the trial as part, like, it was coming off of O.J. Simpson. And obviously, it's more like Menendez brothers, obviously, but it's coming off of a period where this was like a major topic in overall like public discourse. Was of like, do we watch too much TV? And it did feel like, to me, I mean, it felt like it was kind of not fully cooked. And yes, like the chip falling on the satellite dish intersected with the conclusion of that, but I didn't feel like that was, even my first time watching it, I remember thinking like, that's kind of clever, but it's kind of like, it just didn't feel like it was it felt like it was maybe like reaching a little too much to try to make a grand statement about something.
It is trying to make a grand statement, and it doesn't. I just don't think it's developed hardly at all. I mean, they basically pepper it in and weave it in as a narrative thread, but it doesn't really. I don't know. It doesn't really go anywhere. And
knowing that there were that many rewrites to it, that actually makes it make more sense. That if they wanted to make it this way, they might have had to just start from the beginning to make it really connect.
Yeah, and I think there's I came across, I love stealing from Letterboxd. I'm gonna steal again. There was someone who like hit the nail on the head about that part of the movie that I couldn't put my finger on, and they said, as a Letterboxd user, whatever this was making fun of doesn't really exist anymore. Not because we fixed the problem, but because something even worse took its place.
Yeah,
and I think like that's it. Like, it was trying to make fun of like cable TV and the 24-hour news cycle, but like, we're infinitely worse than where we were.
Right. Well,
and so it kind of hits so differently.
And Judd Apatow would kind of revisit that, right, with the Anchorman movies.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something to be said for like the seeds of that idea kind of taking root. I definitely think there's almost like some Borat elements to it too, where it's like, I could easily imagine, somebody getting inspired and attempting to do a really ill-conceived, cringy buddy comedy, dark comedy, where like it's a QAnon person like trying to befriend somebody and you realize soon that they are manipulative and evil and mentally ill. I think it's fascinating enough for at least me to get something out of it, but I can't help but agree with all of you that it's so both underdeveloped and put through too many writers to really be anything more than a sum of its parts.
Push back just a little bit on the we're infinitely worse than where we were, and like I understand that that's a popular attitude to take, and like in some ways okay, but I don't think it's just like blanket truth that like it's gotten worse and worse and worse from where we were with like cable TV. Like even just on a if you look as simple as like how many like women and people of color are like in the writing rooms now, and like even when I was thinking about like watching this movie, like how like oh my gosh, could this like what would my students think of this if they haven't seen it, like or like the what are they called, Zoomers, Gen Z, the youngins, and again like this is a very particular like demographic, and like it's not a cross section of like all young people, right? But like that I'm thinking of like but even thinking like I don't know that this movie could be made in this way anymore. Not that crappy movies don't get made, but like also like there's a lot more good content than there was then. And I'm thinking even like again like this is not a coming of age film in any way, but I associate it with that kind of 13 years old, like what's the buzz? And this was a movie that I didn't see as a young person, but like part of my not interest in seeing it is like I don't relate to Jim Carrey movies. Like, what do I get out of that? But it was like the huge like that's what you had to watch, you know. And this is a weird shift, but I just started like devouring on HBO the Mindy Kaling show, the Sex Lives of College Girls. And like it's like more and more like oh my gosh, like here are like characters that like. Now I'm an old person watching about like 18-year-olds, but I'm like, like for the first time ever, there's a character on the show that I like completely relate to. Like, and just like that kind of thing where like, so I, again, like on the, and this does have to do with like that thing about like cable TV and like consuming more media. And I'm definitely not like an internet utopian person because the internet has also made a lot of things in very specific ways a lot worse. In terms of like misinformation and you know Nazis, but there's also been there's ways in which I think things are better too. But it is an interesting thing to think about, like how we're impacted by the continual intake of media and what that looks like. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that they're trying to make in this film is that like, oh. You know, and they're coming off of like broadcast TV, essentially.
Right.
Like broadcast TV turning into cable into them. But it's like, to me, it's the things that they're being critical of cable TV when internet came along, which wasn't super popular at this moment, but obviously with broadband in like the late 90s and early 2000s became like a whole different animal. And then with social media in the middle of the 2000s, it's just sort of, I think it amplified everything that they were criticizing to like an exponential degree. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point to say it's not infinitely worse in the fact that like everything socially is worse. But I think in terms of the communication style and what we do, it does kind of feel like whatever they saw as sort of the evil or insidious nature of CNN and stuff like that has just gotten to the point where we just now accept that, you know, news and social media sharing is all kind of dystopic. And there's no real, like, I always like, what's the criticism? What's the real critical art now of like social media and the internet? Does it exist? It's like, we were just like so subsumed by it, or
yes, it exists.
Like, I mean, like, but what would be like, what would be the protest to it? You know, like think about like what's the protest of like social media truly?
Well, why is it a protest of social media? Like, why is it a protest of the medium? It's like, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, like,
I think it's a protest of the like replacing true like child rearing and honest relationship forming with like the remnants of like addictive media consumption, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, but again, like, I think there's like a nostalgic narrative of the past that's also like deeply rooted in like whitewashing shit too. Like,
Sure.
and like what, I don't see that being replaced. I don't even see that it necessarily existed in that glorified way. I mean, again, this is what I dislike too, of like the whole like, well, his mother was absent because she, I mean, that little glimpse we get, like she's going out trying to get some, you know, slut, and I mean, it's very subtle, but it's there. And meanwhile, he just gets raised by the television. And what happens when you're raised by the television? Like, well, you turn into a psychopath. And I feel like, for better or for worse, like we're a generation of people who were raised by the television. You know, and like a generation before us, like, are they like, how are the boomers doing mentally? Like, are they doing great? Like, you know, I think again, there's this like narrative of association with like media consumption, overconsumption, mental health and stability, and like the degree to which like families and communities are involved in child rearing, that I think is actually like way oversimplified. And like, who are the people who are often like the most vocal speaking out against like how bad it's gotten? It's like the Ben Stillers. I mean, you know, like to a certain extent, it's like pushback of like different narratives. Really, like it all gets kind of muddied. And again, I'm not trying to say that like I definitely don't buy into like the internet studies, like it's a utopia, everyone's equal, because like that didn't pan out either, right? Like that was like big in like the like early mid 90s, you know, through the early 2000s, where people were like, you know, this is how we fix sexism, because on the internet you don't know who's who. And like that, it just, in a lot of spaces, it just got worse and worse and worse. But again, I feel like it's I don't know, that piece of the movie too, I guess maybe didn't sit well with me.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of is it sort of like this old man yells at a cloud type thing?
Yeah, a little bit. Or like
the good old days when we didn't have the internet and stuff.
Right.
Really,
and it's like, well, I don't know whose good old days were those, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I mean, I'm gonna sound like a Pollyanna about it, and it's a particular little bubble, but like our kids' babysitters are continually using social media to raise money, like, and participate in like collective mutual aid. Like, like I wasn't doing that when I was 16. Like, you know, so again, like I think these are interesting conversations that should continually be had, but like giving the tools too much agency in terms of what they're doing to culture or society. Like they can like magnify and amplify and etc. But like it's not TV that,
it's the people, right?
Yeah. I don't know.
Here's the question. The question of the show. The reason I chose this movie was because it is considered ahead of its time. It's a cult film. It was too dark for the mainstream. It's underappreciated, underrated. I went through about 50 Reddit threads that all essentially said this about the movie. Is that true? Is Cable Guy a cult film that, well, let's not even call it. Was it ahead of its time, number one? And two, should it be sort of remembered as a pioneering film?
I think it's fascinating in how it was made and the circumstances around how it was made, and kind of the almost like Apatow, Stiller, Carey felt like we are on top of the world. Let's get weird. And so from that perspective, I think it's a really interesting box office study I don't know that as a film it holds up all that well. It certainly isn't the worst. Certainly there's been worse Jim Carrey movies, but it's definitely not the worst movie. But I don't know that it holds up that well as a film over time.
Yeah, I'd ultimately agree with you, Mark. I think that there's just enough spark in there that lends it to still being analyzed 25 years later. But it's a fiasco, right? To use Nathan Rabin's words from his year of flops on the AV Club, there is ultimately way better criticisms, analyses done in fiction, both on and off screen in the years since. I think it would be overstating to say that, Cable Guy pioneered that movement for those pieces of art to exist. But it's still worth noting that there weren't many other voices at least attempting to do this, even if it was Old Man Yells at Cloud versions of that voice in the mid 90s, because that's pretty much all that was being amplified in that time period. Right. So it's a curio. I'm going to say, I give it 5 stars with my heart, 3 stars with my brain.
5 stars with my heart. Bridget, what do you think?
I mean, so despite my vocal killjoy criticisms, because it's what I do for a living, there are those like moments in the film where like I didn't not laugh while I was watching it.
Right.
And it's I don't hate it. I do think I'll always have like I wonder like how would I feel about this film if I had seen it as a teenager when it came out, as a young teenager.
Yeah.
I probably would have I liked Ace Ventura a lot. I have very fond memories of telling my parents that I was seeing Blank Check, and then they dropped us off, and I did not see Blank Check. I saw Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. But I don't. There are moments where it's funny, like it's kind of interesting trying to do a thing. I definitely don't think it's ahead of its time, and in fact, it feels very much a product of its time.
Yeah,
in terms of everything about it, like even the darkness, like it didn't invent dark comedies. I mean, it might have invented a dark role for Jim Carrey to play.
Right.
So was it like interesting and pivotal for the trajectory of his career? Like probably, maybe. But I don't think it's even pioneering in terms of dark comedies in the mainstream. I think it definitely is a cult classic. Like I mean, I don't know how we define that, but that's just how I think of it, right? But no, I think it's actually a movie that is an example of something that's very much a product of, and this little like time capsule of like when it happened.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Like when I was growing up with this, I'd be like, oh, this is, and probably when I was in my 20s too, I would have been like, oh, this is like, it's underappreciated, it's underrated. But now watching it does feel like a time capsule. It feels like, oh, if you want to know what the mid 90s was and you were a dude, say under 30, like this is kind of the vibe that you would get, like being a teenager and stuff like this. And be like, yeah, this is what we thought was funny. And this is how we acted as men, usually, like very, just very strange and like emotionally maldeveloped.
Right.
So yeah, maybe a fondly remembered film that isn't so fond. I guess is that how
It's a roller coaster because it was derided upon release, grown to love in a cult classic capacity, and now we're coming back down to earth on it.
Yeah, I think we are coming back down to earth. Brigitte and Mark, any closing thoughts on Cable Guy?
The last thing that I want to point out that like really struck me is when Chip, our friend, is talking to Matthew about he's kind of giving him what's actually like he accidentally at these points in the movie gives him like good advice.
Right.
And I think like those are really interesting moments, and I'm like, where could that go? Oh no, nowhere is where it goes. But like when he says like, well, maybe did you think about like why your girlfriend actually moved out? Like why she needs space? And so he says something, and it's like, it's cheesy and it's stupid, but it's something about like the unique complexity and beauty of women. Right. And then like he goes on to say like, of course she like Sleepless in Seattle. They all do. Like just like these continual like contradictions. And again, like I think there's something about that that's like it's cringy, but it's also like funny and it's interesting. And if the movie had played some of that up and been more intentional about that, or even like self-aware about it, and I think it could have really worked. So I like those weird moments in there.
Little moments.
Some silver linings.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Otherwise, wildly uneven film.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Brigitte and Mark, for being here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
Can
you.
I close the show with my top 5 Jim Carrey weird voices from the film?
Yes.
Are you going to do them or are you going to talk about them?
I'm going to attempt to replicate them.
No, it's
Here
going to
we
be
go.
so bad. I look forward to this. Yeah, let's go.
Okay, number 5.
Yeah, we're gonna start with number 5. Number 5, medieval times scene. Jim Carrey's Chip Douglas is attempting to verbally recreate the music from the Star Trek battle between Kirk and Spock. And I had forgotten where this sound had come from, but it sometimes just like sparks in my head. I love it so much.
Yes.
Okay.
Number 5.
Number 4 is the nightmare scene, which is a lovely bit of costuming, by the way. The lime green contact lenses and silver.
There,
Where he for some reason says in the hallway, "Kabla gula," right? I don't know why, but he says cable guy, but he doesn't.
Right.
Yeah,
that's good.
Number 3 is in the same scene. There's a lot of interesting Jim Carrey voices in that nightmare sequence. But I just absolutely lost it when he's like pretending to walk away, and the footsteps get softer and softer, and he goes, "Bye." At the very end, it's just, oh my gosh, what a silly guy.
He's a hoot.
What
a goof.
Number 2, the morning after the karaoke party. And Steven is coming to the realization that he slept with a prostitute. And
that's an interesting thing to
we didn't even touch that, did we?
Anyway.
But more importantly than that, Jim Carrey says orange juice in a very funny way. He says,
"Yes,
juice," and it's just wonderful. And then number 1, of course, I am such like a teenage boy still, a sucker for the porno password scene. When I can't even do it. When he whispers extreme close up on Jim Carrey's lips, and he says, "Nipple." Oh my god! I cannot do it justice.
That did make me laugh despite myself.
There's so many great scenes.
Genuinely funny.
Yeah, the way it starts with just like showing like him writing foreskin on a piece of paper before we know what's happening. That was funny. Anyway, thank you, Chris, for that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was wonderful, and it really does encapsulate a positive thing about the film.
Yep, indeed. Thank you so much for having us. We'd love to be back. Check out our podcast sometime.
Yeah. Has there been a new episode?
There will be.
Well, give us a name. Give us a way where we can find you.
You can find us at Screen Time.
Screen Time, a quarantine family podcast,
and we've had a long hiatus from season 1. Go back and binge season 1. We dare you.
It's all on the web. World Wide Web. Information highway.
On your phone or computer or whatever. Play Mortal Kombat while you listen. And
True paradise.
I would say season 2 will premiere January.
Nice.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah. So
you guys gotta have us on.
Yeah, absolutely.
You bet.
What are we doing next week, Chris?
Next
What's
week-
our finale? We're doing a finale.
we got to cut it an episode earlier than usual because the holidays are coming up. But we're going to try to find time in between Jesus' birth and the birth of the new year to discuss both the French Dispatch
Ooh,
and the 20th anniversary of the Royal Tenenbaums.
wonderful.
Oh,
We saw French
A double-
Dispatch.
I'll be
It was
listening to
great.
double banger.
Yeah. Mhm.
It's going to be a big season finale.
It is.
Oh, yeah.
So check us
Supersized.
out.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
the end
cool.
of season 5. Thanks for listening. This has been Film Trace.